So we had these averages that described how a market was doing, and so like the Dow Jones Industrial Average was the most common one. And we like to look at that because it's less volatile. It gives us a good idea about how the whole market is doing rather than just a couple things. But we also talked last week about if we are doing investing and we start looking at investing, some of the tips on how to do that well, and one of them was diversifying your investments. I mean, ideally, we'd be able to buy one of these sorts of things, right? We'd be able to buy like 500 stocks so that we had this wide variety of stocks in our portfolio. That way, if one of them went down, the others are still okay. We're insulated from drastic changes in the market that way. But can you afford 500 stocks? Probably not, right? And so you do, though, have other alternatives, other ways that we can reach the same kind of goal. And generally, the one that's considered the best of those is mutual funds. And so a mutual fund is just like the same kind of an idea of like the Dow Jones or something like that. It's a collection of stock, except that a mutual fund is a collection of stocks that you can buy into very directly. And it's a great way to diversify your investment, and you can just buy one thing, and you're actually buying all these other things. And so it gives you that diversification, to use the nice fancy financial word there, which of course, remember, just means spreading your money around so that it's not all in one big place. Now, I want to give you a nice illustration about what a mutual fund really looks like here, because I want you to understand these. They're so useful, come up so much. I want you to really see. So here's a simple example of a mutual fund. We want to invest $50. So we got $50 that we want to invest, and we want to buy stocks from companies A and B. I'm making it nice and simple here, just two stocks. Mutual funds normally have much more than that in them. The problem, though, is that stock A and stock B each cost $100 per share. And so when we have our $50, we don't have enough to buy even one share of A, let alone A and B. But there is a way around this. We could find 3 friends who also want to invest $50 into stocks A and B. And so we have our money, and we can pool our money. Notice that all of us over here, we have a grand total of $200. Well, that's enough then to buy $200 worth of stock. So we can buy a share of A and a share of B that way. This, notice, we have funded our purchase together. Another way to say together is mutually. We have funded it mutually, hence the name mutual fund. It's a way of getting multiple people to invest in the same kind of thing, basically, is what's going on. So this is a mutual fund. Now, this is a very simple mutual fund. Just a couple stocks, just a few people. Most mutual funds are operating more on the hundreds of stocks and thousands of people kind of scale. And so that's where we get that diversification. But seeing how they work, it has some subtleties in it. So let's actually take a look at something like this. What if stock A increased to be worth $120 a year from now, but B stayed the same? If we had only invested in A, we would have done really well here. If we had only invested in stock B, we would have gained nothing over this year. But because we invested in both of them, we made some money. Because A went up, even though B didn't. The question is, how much money did we make? What is our share of that? Well, how much total is our mutual fund worth? $220, exactly. Now, how many pieces am I going to be cutting that up into? 4. And so I do 220 divided by 4, and that'll tell me how much my piece is worth. And so then, if I do that, I end up finding that it's $55. So over that time, I made $5.
How many hours? Days?
Now, $5 might not sound like a lot of money that we made. So let's actually put this into terms so we can see what that really means. Let's figure out what that is as a percent. What was our increase? Well, you'll notice I went up by 5 and I started at 50. So basically what it's saying is 5 is what percent of 50? You remember those questions coming up in the last unit, right? This is how, this is why. We need to be able to figure out this sort of thing. So 5% or 5 is what percent of 50? Well, this is where we're going to do the 5 divided by 50. What is 5 divided by 50? If we do that calculation, it gives us 0.1. But of course, it's not 0.1%, right? Remember, that is our answer as a decimal. I want to turn it into a percent still. So we do the 0.1 times 100 to turn it into a percent. And so that really means 10%. So we increased by 10%. Is a 10% increase in a year pretty good? Yeah, that would actually be considered a pretty good return. Not perfect, but still really good. If you're making 10% on all your investments your entire life, you're going to come out just fine.
Rich?
All right, so now after that, let's say the year after that, stock A didn't grow at all, but stock B caught up. Let's say stock B is now worth $120. How much is our investment worth in this case? And notice the words that's being asked. How much is our investment worth? In other words, how much is our share of this worth? All right, so to figure that out, we first have to figure out, okay, how much total is it worth here? Well, 120 and 120 is 240. So the whole thing is worth 240. Are we splitting it up equally? Yes, because everybody put in the same amount. Everybody put in $50, so we're splitting this equally. So we're going to do 240 divided by 4 to find out how much our particular... It's worth $60 now. So in this case, how much or by what percent did our investment increase? Now, this is the tricky part with this one. It's not 10% this time. Last time we gained $5, and that was 10%. But this time it's not. Because in this case, we went from 55 to 60. We didn't go from 50 to 55. So we started with more. So really the question that we're being asked here is 5, the amount that we gained, is what percent of 55? All right, so to figure this out then, we end up having to do 5 divided by 55. And when you do that, you notice you don't get 0.1. You end up getting 0. Oops, forgot a 0 there. 0, 9, 0, 9, 0, 9, 0, 9. It keeps repeating this 0, 9 pattern over and over and over. So what is that as a percent? If you multiply that then by 100, you get 9.090909 and so on percent. I'll go ahead and round it to 9.09% for the moment. And so notice, it went up by the same amount both years. Both years I gained $5. But the first year I gained 10%. The second year I gained just over 9%. So the more you have in there, the more it has to go up for you to keep the same kind of percent of progress. So that also, though, is the beautiful thing, though, because as it does continue going up by that kind of a percent, it grows faster and faster when we make more and more each year. Now, we're at this point where we all have $60 in it. The total fund is worth $240. If it did go up by 10% now, how much would our investment change? So, if I want to know, let's see here, the value of the mutual fund increase that amount. So I need to start by knowing what my mutual fund is currently worth. So it's currently worth 240. How do I figure out 10% of 240?
240 divided by 0, oh, 0.1.
Multiplied. Yep. Times 0.1. Because I take the 10% and I write it as a decimal. That's where I get the 0.1 from. If I do that, I get 24. Now that tells us how much we went up by. So we gained $24. But of course that means the total value would be $264. That's our total right now. So what would that make our part of this? Well, we'd have to do the 264 divided by 4 again, because we own 1/4 of this and everybody put in the same amount. That means we end up having $66 in our investment. Now notice, when the fund increased by 10%, so the total value over here went up by 10%, notice our share of it also went up by 10%. That's why when you look at stocks and things like that, they generally don't say it went up by $100. You don't care about that number so much. What you care about is what percent did it increase. Because if the whole fund goes up by 10%, your share of it also goes up by 10%. That's why percents are so important to know and understand, because they let us see this information in a way that we couldn't otherwise, and an easy way to convey it and communicate it all the way through. Now, in all those examples, I was doing nice simple examples where there are 4 people who all put in the exact same thing. But another friend wants to get in on this action. They want to put in 200 because they say, hey, you've been doing pretty well in this fund recently. I want to be able to make about 10% a year on this as well. Can I put in $200 and invest that? Can we do that?
They're going to get more.
Is it possible? I mean, because then it's not everybody with an equal share. Can you have different shares in there?
Yeah, but people are going to get mad.
Well, if we did that, well, that would change how much was in the total fund, right? What would this 264 become if they invest?
464.
464, yeah. So it become like 464. Now, if that 464 went up by 10%, what percent would our share go up by?
10 divided by 4.
It would still go up by 10%.
But then that person who put in $200 can give you your money.
Yep. Now, the person who put in $200, they would also gain 10%, yes. But my 10%, I put in less money, so my 10% is a little bit less. They put in more money, so their 10% means they put in a little bit more. But that's the way the investing works. The more you put in at the start, the more you make when it goes up.
Why can't they just do their own because they have?
Now, the question does come up though, well, should we instead limit this? Should we instead say, no, we want everyone to have put in the same amount. In order to buy in, you got to put in $66. Well, imagine now big scale mutual funds. Remember, this is a simple example with just a few people involved. If you have a mutual fund with 1,000 people in it, and they all buy a bunch of funds together at the start. Let's say they put in $50 all at the start in this big old mutual fund way back when. Today, each of them has an investment that's worth $10,000. Do you want to have to put in $10,000 to join in on that mutual fund?
No.
No. The beauty of the mutual fund is you can still buy in with just $50. Or you can buy in with $200, or you could buy in with the $10,000. We're spreading out that purchasing power amongst so many people. But if the fund goes up by 5%, everybody's investment goes up by 5% of their amount. And so it doesn't have to be equal shares at the start. But you probably would want to maybe put in some sort of minimum amount to join. You don't want someone saying, can I put in $1? And then trying to figure out how to buy $1 worth of stock. And so a lot of mutual funds, they'll say, yes, you can buy into our mutual fund with anything you want, but it has to be at least this. And different mutual funds have different amounts for how much they'll require you to put in at the start. All right, now, I have one last question for you. Here we have a completely new mutual fund. So they're buying a whole bunch of stocks in this mutual fund. Now, we don't know what those stocks are right now, and actually we don't have to know right now. What we do know is that these are all of our investors over here. We have invested $200. But we also have those other people that have put in money on this one. So notice, some people put in just $100, one person put in $800. There's a wide variety there. If the entire fund value increases by $400, how much will our investment increase? You're going to need some time to figure this problem out.